yeah, really warm welcome to you, and especially warm welcome if this is your first time to the London Buddhist Centre. I know it is for many of you, and at the same time I do recognise a few of you as well. So my name is Subhadramati, and I'm giving the first of our talks today. It's going to be a series of 4, and what I'll do is I'll speak for a bit, and then I'll stop, and then there'll be a chance for questions. Yeah, that's my plan anyway. Sometimes I say that, then I go on for too long and there's no time for questions, but hopefully I'll leave enough time so that if there's any questions about anything I've said, or any questions about Buddhism or this Buddhist centre, you can ask me, but particularly about anything that I've said. So good. So what I'm talking about, the title I've been given is How to Have a Happy Mind. How to have a happy mind. So what I was thinking is that usually what we do to try and be happy is usually, and sort of naturally in a way, what we do to try and be happy is that we try sort of bring towards us, we try and get basically things that we want. That could be, well, material things, but it could also be kind of the friends we like and even the ideas we like. We try and kind of get the things that we want, and we try and keep away the things that we don't want. So we try and, quite naturally and quite common sensely in a way, that's what we usually do as human beings. But what the teaching of the Buddha says is that while it's perfectly understandable that we do that, actually it doesn't work. And it doesn't work in quite a sort of profound way, because what it does is, the one way I've been thinking of it recently is that by doing that, we unwittingly tighten the knot of ourselves, by sort of seeking to bring to us the things that we want and keep away the things that we don't want. Although that's perfectly natural and understandable, we tighten the knot of ourselves, and that makes us more unhappy. Even if we don't kind of feel sort of, we might, yes, it's interesting, this word unhappiness, because you might immediately think, oh, I'm not unhappy, I'm perfectly fine, So another way to put it is it moves us further away from the happiness that is possible, and that there's much more of fulfillment and happiness possible for us than we usually realise. According to the Buddha, there's much more to this being human, in a way that we realise, or even that we imagine, or even that we can imagine. There's much more. And by doing the sort of usual human thing that I've just described, that moves it further away from that, from the potential for real fulfillment. Hi there, and you come, grab a seat. I think there's a seat just in the middle there, or sit at the side. What it does is it increases the tendency to look at life from the point of view of what's in it for me. That's quite a sort of gross and even crude way of putting it. Of course, we probably are much more subtle than that. But if we look at ourselves deeply enough, that's, for example, why we meditate as Buddhists, to try and look at ourselves deeply. You'll find that in every experience, every encounter, if we're not a Buddha already, there'll be a little trace of what's in it for me. Usually because we're sort of grown-ups and we're quite sophisticated, we sort of disguise that and we hide it sometimes even from ourselves. But if you look closely enough, you'll find a vestige of what's in it for me. I always think children are great because they don't hide it in a way. I always remember looking after my nephew when he was young, and he was about 3 or 4 at the time, and I was looking after him. I remember he said, "I love Mum, I love Dad, I love Joe, that was his brother, but I hate Subhadramati. That's me, by the way, Subhadramati. I forgot to introduce myself. So my name's Subhadramati, and my little nephew loved his mum, loved his dad, loved his brother, but he hated me, Subhadramati. And in a way, I found that quite refreshing. Well, no, I didn't actually. I found out at the time, but ouch, I managed to restrain myself from saying I hate you too. I did try to remember he's only 4, but I found it refreshing in that at least it's honest, whereas we as adults are more sophisticated, and we hide that even from ourselves, that tendency to think to what's in this for me. But at the same time, one thing I'm going to be trying to stress throughout the talk is I don't want it to sound moralistic. So that what you might call self-interest, from a Buddhist point of view, isn't bad, it isn't evil. There's no notions like sinfulness or so on in the Buddhist teaching. It's mistaken. It's common sense, where we're making a mistake. According to the Buddha, he was born an ordinary human being like us, and went on this huge quest to discover the truth. And when he realised what we call enlightenment, it's almost like the response would be, what a pity, we've all been making this mistake. And there certainly wouldn't be a judgmentalism in that. It'd be more like the compassionate response of, what a shame, how foolish we've all been. We thought it was this, but actually it was that, you know? So that circling around ourselves isn't morally bad, but it will mean that the complete fulfillment, as long as we do that from the point of view of a Buddha, an enlightened being, we're much less than fulfilled. There's a much, much more satisfying way of being. And in a way, the Buddha's life is lived to discover that. So the image for this mistaken way of being, and I think Maitri Vadri, who's our second speaker, is going to go more into this in the second talk, I think, is a wheel. So this mistaken way is a wheel where we're circling around ourselves, really. We're circling around ourselves, and that's limited. Even if we're enjoying life, even if our life's fine in a way, as long as we're sort of circling around like me in the middle of everything, what's in it for me? That looking at life as what is in it for me, then even if we're, as I say, having happy experiences, that's limited. And not only is it limited, the traditional Buddhist image of this wheel is it's held by a very frightening monster, and that monster is the monster of impermanence. So basically, even if we're kind of happy enough with life and so on, there is that monster of impermanence gripping our lives, which means that one day we'll lose our life. One day we will lose that, and that, from the unenlightened point of view, that's frightening. It ought to be frightening, actually. My own teacher, Bhante Sangharaj, just said that sometimes when people say they're not frightened of death, he said it isn't so much that they lack a fear of death, it's just that they lack imagination. Yeah, so actually death is a frightening thing, you know. We ought to be frightened of that, really. So you've got this image of us, you know, kind of happy enough perhaps, but circling round and round ourselves in the middle of everything, this image of a wheel, and it's held by this monster of impermanence. So, and the Buddha's saying actually there's a freer and more fulfilling way of living. I was thinking about this. Well, I think about it a lot. In a way, it's what we as Buddhists think about all the time, really. But I was thinking about particularly, I was rereading the novel The Road. I don't know if people read that by Cormac McCarthy, The Road, or seen the film. Anybody read it or seen the film? Yeah, a few of you? Yeah, okay. Hi there, and you come, grab a cushion or seat. I'll just tell you briefly about it, and you come, good. Good. Oh, more. Great. Oh, more. Great. Okay. Let's all sort of try and find a little space. Put your hand up if there's any sort of space near you. And yeah, people follow the hands and you'll find a space. I'll just pause a minute. Welcome. Good. So again, put your hand up if there's a space near you. I think there's a chair just there if you'd rather have a chair, yeah? Follow the hands, yeah. Okay, good. So, do pass cushions along. So, for those of you who've just come in, I'm hopefully illustrating something about Buddhism by talking about a novel called The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and an American writer. Anyway, it's a sort of apocalyptic novel, and it's definitely an allegory, the novel. And so I've got one way of reading it, and other people might have other ways. But basically, it's set in America, and some huge apocalypse has happened. America's basically burnt down, yeah, so America's basically burnt down, and there's very few survivors, and the story centres around a man and his son. It's an allegory because they're not, hi there, just grab a space, yeah. It's an allegory because they're not given names. It's the man and the boy, and they're trying to get to the sea. You don't exactly know why, but you can sort of imagine the instinct. They're trying to get to the sea. It's very, very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous situation because, as I say, there's very few survivors and people's primitive instincts have taken over, so people are just attacking each other. Even there's no food, so even they're eating each other, stealing from each other. Not that there's much to steal, and they're travelling along this road, which again is kind of it's kind of iconic. This idea of a journey, a man and a boy, and what keeps happening is, I'm not doing too many spoilers for the novel, but basically what keeps happening is, within this very terrible situation, it ricochets between something a bit better happening and then something a bit worse happening. Yeah, so they're travelling along, and then as I say, they're starving, but then they suddenly find a whole hidden store of food, and they kind of they can eat their fill and load it up. But then they're travelling along a bit more, and a whole band of, terrifying, kind of wild people, come, and they have to flee for their lives, and then and they just manage to escape, and then they go along, and then something else mildly good happens, within this context, and then something really terrible. So it just keeps ricocheting between that, and the whole kind of, the whole world basically has burnt down. And I thought, that's kind of just like us, really, in a certain sense, that we're going along, we're in the grip of this monster of impermanence, our life's going to end, we don't know when, and we sort of ricochet between, sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen. We just try and we manoeuvre our way between those things. But then what you've got is, you have got something more than that, otherwise it would be very, very bleak indeed. In which the man and the boy, they're trying to survive not just for the sake of survival, but they're trying to keep, they refer to it as the flame alive, and they mean the flame of goodness. That's what they mean. They're trying to keep a flame of goodness alive in where everything's just turned barbaric. Yeah? And the boys obviously depicting the sort of innocence, really, because gradually that flame starts to die in the man as more and more difficult things happen. But the little boy, it doesn't die in him, so he keeps the flame of goodness alive. I won't tell you what happens in the end, just in case you read it, but that's my reading of it. So, and I thought, oh yeah, that's what that says to me is there has to be more than just survival. So even though this novel seems very kind of dramatic, in a certain sense, I think it's not very different from us. And if all we do is try and avoid the difficult experiences and get the good experiences, even if we're doing it in a more sophisticated way, then, well, in a way, that's not really enough, I think, for life. That's not really enough for us to think we've lived a human life. So what we need to do, I was going to say what Buddhism is calling us to do, but I think it's actually what life itself is calling us to do. It's calling us to get off this wheel, this going round and round, this sort of cyclic mode of being, where we're just repeating old habits, sort of digging deeper grooves from ourselves, and basically what this image of the wheel, what particularly speaks to me about it is it's in one dimension. Yeah, you just got this sense of going round and round in one dimension, and it's held, as I say, by this monster of impermanence. So what life is calling us to do, what a kind of fully human life is calling us to do, is get off this wheel, get out of this cyclic way of being. If we want to really have a life that's sort of worthy of us, actually, have a life that's worthy of us as human beings. And the whole of the Buddhist teachings, you can say, are giving us a means of doing that, yeah? And that's what the Buddha himself discovered. So in a way I can now go on to launch into any Buddhist teachings to say how we're going to do this, but I thought I'd approach it in one particular way. And I was thinking about, just the notion of mind. Buddhism's got quite a lot of different words for mind, because the mind is very important in Buddhism. One of the words for mind is mati. I was thinking of this because it's in my Buddhist name, Subhadramati. When we're ordained, we're given names the names are like a teaching, really, as something to strive towards. So my name's Subhadramati, and it's got this word mati, which means mind, in it. And mati means mind in two ways. It means mind in, just the ordinary way we might think of mind, but also it means minded to, yeah? So it could include qualities such as devotion or determination and so on. See what I mean? It's like minded, we say that in English, don't we? Minded to something. So, and that's what I started to think about when I was thinking about what I wanted to say today about how to have a happy mind. If you want to have a happy mind, I think, you can argue with me later, or just we can discuss it later, I think the first thing is you have to be minded to value. If you want to have a happy mind, you need to be minded to value. And as soon as you're minded to value, then as soon as you are, the minute you are, the second you are, then you get off the wheel. You get out of this cyclic mode of existence. You get out of this one-dimensional way of experiencing the world. Even if your world is quite sophisticated and full of pleasant things, even quite refined pleasant things, it's still cyclic. But as soon as you're minded to value, then you sort of you raise yourself out of that. And the important thing is that we all know that experience. That isn't I'm not saying something to you that you haven't experienced yourself. We all know moments, or even longer than moments, sort of times in our life where we have been minded to value. We've all had glimpses of that, or sometimes much more sustained experiences of that. Sometimes that comes through difficult experiences. the reason why I was looking after this little nephew, this is an example from my own life, the reason why I was looking after this little nephew in the first place, the one who, for people who come in late, said, I love mum, I love dad, but I hate Subhadramati. I was looking after him because his mum was very, very ill at the time, my sister, my younger sister. She has now recovered. But it was really interesting when I think back on that time. She had very advanced cancer, and it was quite possible that she wouldn't survive leaving her young children, but luckily, as I say, she did survive. And of course, I'm really, really pleased she got better and that she survived. More than pleased doesn't do justice for it. At the same time, and I'm sure you may have experienced something similar, in that time of her being ill, and I was staying with her and the family, it was like a really, really precious time. And I remember particularly that we had very deep and very honest communication with each other at that time. And also I remember particularly that she was having, just lots and lots of, insights really about the nature of life and what's really important in life. Like she really saw people's generosity and how generosity was more important than anything. She really saw that, in a way you can't control life. I remember saying, this is the story of my life now. She didn't, in a way, rail against being ill, even though she wanted to get better. I remember that particularly because I remember thinking, gosh, I'm supposed to be the Buddhist who's been practicing all these years, but yet she's much more insightful than I am. So at that time I remember the sort of tenderness, the depth of our communication, and I remember that she was having a lot of insights about the nature of life. So although I'm glad she got better, obviously, I kind of miss that time, because now when I see her, we still get on well, but we mostly just, I don't know, watch the telly or hang out or something, and it hasn't quite got that sort of bittersweet, taste or value to it. Have people had that kind of, do you sort of know what I mean? Maybe, some of you. So sometimes that taste of value comes through a possibly difficult experience. Not automatically through a difficult experience, but sometimes it comes through something, more, just more pleasant in a way. Like it might come just through an experience of beauty, just the oddness we might feel when we just see something very, very beautiful in nature, like a beautiful mountain range, or, you look up at the stars and you very positively realise one's own smallness and the vastness of everything. It can be uplifting. Sometimes that can be scary as well, but sometimes it can be uplifting. Or the beauty of art, or the beauty of another person, another person really acting really bravely, or another person really speaking the truth against the odds, yeah? All of I'm sure that all of us have experienced that sort of uplift, but it's more than just an emotional uplift, it's a connection with value that kind of takes us out of this one-dimensional way of being and kind of lifts us up in some way. And I think that's important to know that that Buddhism isn't trying to impose something on us. It's giving us kind of means and practices, but their practices, you could say, to help us to live our life up to our highest moments. Yeah. That what we do is, one way you could put it, and again this is how my own teacher put it, is we find the truth and then we live by it. In other words, we value that value and then we commit ourselves to it, yeah? And that's what the Buddhist Centre's for. That's what everything we do here at this centre for, is to help us to find the value, because you need to, in a way, you need to have an openness to that, a receptivity to that, to notice it. But then, more importantly, to live up to it, to live by it. As I say, to commit ourselves to it. Paradoxically, it's only when we commit ourselves to something beyond ourselves we can really be ourselves in a way. We think we can be ourselves by, by sort of circling everything round ourselves, but actually, paradoxically, it's only when we positively forget to do that and respond to something much bigger than ourselves that paradoxically we can really be ourselves. And that's what, that's what I think sort of befits us as human beings. So it's important not to dismiss those experiences when we are in touch with value, even when we fall back from them. It can be easy to kind of almost dismiss it and think, oh, that was all just a dream or something, or that just, I don't know, even that was a sort of mistake, and real life is kind of, this is the real nitty-gritty life. I think we all kind of live on two dimensions, really. We live on the ordinary kind of time and space dimension of getting on with things and doing the practicalities of our life. But we also live in this kind of higher way, which is the way of value, which is when we're lifted out of that, we all have that within us, and some of us live more and more from that. A Buddha would be somebody who completely lived from that all the time, I completely live from that all the time, and we can, that's what we're, as I say, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move towards that, or allow that value to move more and more towards us. I was thinking about the goldness often of our Buddhist images, and usually when I think of the goldness, as I've said, the Buddha isn't God. Buddha was an ordinary human being who realised this state called enlightenment, so he wasn't like really literally gold. But we depict him as gold, because the state of enlightenment, the state of everything not just circling back to what's in it for me, would be completely radiant. It'd be blissful and it'd be completely radiant. So that's why the Buddha's sort of larger than life, as it were, in this figure, and also gold. But I think the goldness could also be that somebody who's enlightened, what we call enlightened, is somebody who's completely permeated by value, who's not kind of separated from life. It's like we're usually a sort of walking, talking defense mechanism against life. When we're just in this one dimension, what's in it for me sort of mode, we're defending ourselves against life. But a Buddha would be somebody who's just, the defences aren't there anymore, so sort of life would come in its fullness. Life would come in its fullness. So I was thinking perhaps that's why we can see the Buddha. That's why if you were trying to paint him or sculpt him, the figure of the Buddha, you'd want to do it gold, really. Well, I'd want to do it gold. So that's the first thing. We want to be minded. If we want to have a happy mind, I'm saying we have to be minded to value. We have to be minded to something bigger than us. I also think we have to be minded to sort of broader than us. So we have to be minded bigger than us, sort of up to value, and broader than us. We have to be minded to other people as people. So again, while we're just circling around me in the middle of everything, then other people are a threat to that. And again, we'll experience that. We probably, that's where again the honesty of my little nephew's Jack was refreshing, because I was a threat to him, so he could say he hated me quite unrestrainedly, given he was only 4. But because we're not only 4, we've got more sort of sophisticated and sort of secret ways of experiencing that. But I think to the extent that we've got me in the middle of everything, other people, there'll be a threat to that. So we'll feel betrayed by other people, and then we'll blame them. or we'll want more from other people than they can possibly give us. We'll be looking for sort of unrealistically to them, not just psychologically unrealistically to them, but almost existentially, that we'll look to other people as if they can sort of be the answer to us, whereas another person can't possibly do that, no matter how wonderful they are. Or we'll be jealous of them. We'll feel envious or jealous in relation to other people. So that's what I mean by the while we're circling around me, other people will experience as some sort of threat, even if we only experience that in the secret depths of our own hearts. And again, I'm not being moralistic here. I really, really want to stress that this just is the problem of being a human being. It's not that we're specially bad because we're jealous or something. It just is the problem of being a human being and a world of other human beings. And the Buddha is saying there's another way to be. There's another way to be. And again, we will all have had experience of this other way to be, where the separation between ourselves and another just disappears. If we're not enlightened, that will be temporary. And I don't mean by that, I don't mean a sort of horrible sort of merging. That would be not what Buddhism is saying. When I say that separation disappears, it's more like the experience where, and I know you will all have had this, where somebody else's happiness matters as much to us as our own happiness, yeah? And we've all experienced this in small and large ways. You know that experience when somebody we really love asks us to do something. You just naturally want to do it, don't you, if you really love them. So then there's an interesting question you could ask yourself about that is whose will is it anymore? Yeah. So you can no longer say it's entirely my will because they've asked you to do it. It sort of depended on them asking you to do it, but it's not completely their will either because you're willingly doing it. Yeah. You want to do it. You know, it's like that experience when you really love somebody and it's their birthday or something and you just find the right present. It's so exciting, isn't it? You're so happy that you found something that will make them happy. Or conversely, when somebody you really love is suffering, especially I think if it is a child, you would if you could bear it for them, you would. You know, you could have that thought, oh, if I was able to bear that for you, I would, you know. So again, do people recognise those kind of experiences? Yeah, that's good, because it is just a human experience. That's what I mean by that separation between yourself and another person, at least temporarily disappears. Your will and their will you can't really distinguish anymore. That's very, very important experience. And really to be valued. A Buddha would experience that with all beings all the time, yeah? Which on one hand seems impossibly lofty, but on the other hand, we've all had a glimpse of that, yeah? And the Buddha saying, well, it would be possible to experience that with all beings all the time and not be overwhelmed at all. It wouldn't be an overwhelming experience. You'd just be big enough, as it were, to just that other people's happiness would be your happiness. That other people's suffering, you would just, it would be no conflict about responding to that. It would just, there would be nothing else you could do but respond to that. But at the same time, you'd be big enough for it not to overwhelm you. That's what the mind of a Buddha would be like. The heart of a Buddha would be like. So again, we've all had tastes of that. Again, really, we can really value those tastes, and then we can practice towards making that more and more of our experience. That's why for Buddhists the practice of generosity is so important, for example. When we're practicing it, it might feel clunky. Sometimes it just arises spontaneously, but we can't just leave it to chance. So we do try and practice generosity and so on. And yeah, that can feel clunky and even a little bit self-conscious, or even a big bit self-conscious. And I always get reminded of something the poet Seamus Heaney said about the practice of poetry. He said that writing poetry is like dropping the windlass to the well of poetry. So the windlass is the sort of the windy thing with the bucket on it. So he says it's like winding the windlass to the well of poetry. He said that most times the bucket just comes up empty, full of air, he said. But then he said sometimes you sort of feel the heaviness of the bucket and you've broken the skin on the surface of yourself. I really, really like that. Very, very poetic. And that's what we're doing when we're... So sometimes we have a spontaneous experience of that sort of connectedness, even interconnectedness. Most of the time, we probably don't. We probably don't feel like being generous and so on. Well, if you're anything like me, but you practice it, and then it may feel self-conscious, may feel it isn't really working, but then you feel the sort of weight of the water in the bucket when then you've broken the skin on the surface of yourself, and that's inspiration. So what I'm saying is, if you want to have a happy mind, I think, and what Buddhism teaches, is that you have to be minded to value. In other words, you have to reach up, and that you have to be minded to other people as people. In other words, you have to reach out. And the image for this, as opposed to the image of the wheel, which just goes round and round in a cyclic way, is the image of a spiral. And I really love this image because the wheel, if you can imagine it on this plane, as I said, is one-dimensional, but the spiral is three-dimensional. Yeah, so it's ever expanding, and it's ever sort of rising up. Yeah, so you go from being in one dimension to this upward reaching and outward reaching. So I love that image because it's in three dimensions, and also I love it because it's completely limitless. So if you imagine this spiral, keep going out and out and up and up, it never ends. Yeah, it never ends. So it's an image of constant creativity. That's my favourite description of enlightenment, is constant and continual creativity. When I say creativity, I don't mean that in a sort of limited sense of, usually use it in terms of being artistic and so on. It could include that, but I mean just creative in our very being, yeah? And I really love that because it's a limitless ideal. So as Buddhists, we have this figure of the Buddha, and we have this ideal of enlightenment, but it's a limitless ideal. Enlightenment isn't an end point. Enlightenment is the end of something. It's the end of circling around me in the middle of everything. So it's the end of, if you're enlightened, you never again feel threatened by another person. You never again feel hatred. You never again feel that sort of aching, wanting, and you never again feel those things. So it is the end of something. But in another way, it's not the end, because that mode of creativity can never end. So if you take a quality such as generosity or kindness, it will just keep on finding new and more creative ways of expressing itself, even for a Buddha, even for an enlightened being. So in that sense, it never ends. So that's why I say the ideal is limitless. So you've got a limitless ideal, and at the same time you can start now. You can start now. So on one hand you've got that, which is something beyond what we even can imagine. But you've also got the practicality of you can completely start now. That reaching out starts with just the next generous thing we do. That reaching up starts with just responding to the next thing of value we encounter, whether that's beauty of nature or art, or beauty in the actions of another person, or beauty anywhere we find it, and it's allowing those experiences into our life and valuing them. So that's what I think of how to have a happy mind, being minded to value upwards, and being minded to other people as other people outwards. So I have actually managed to stop in time, that I've got time to take any questions that you might have on that. So there's quite a lot of us, so we won't be able to have a discussion as such with each other. But if there's any questions you've got for me, or about anything I've said particularly, it could be anything about Buddhism, but particularly about anything I've said, do ask me. Yeah, there's a question.
Referring to the novel, you were saying there's a series of bad things and a series of good things. Is that a reference to suffering and enlightenment coming from suffering? Is suffering not necessary for the enlightenment stages to come?
I think I know what you mean, but just say a little bit more. Is suffering necessary?
For stages of enlightenment in one's life. Is that a Buddhist teaching? I'm not sure. Okay, so there's... I think I might be understanding your question in two ways. So is suffering necessary? So there's two ways of answering the question. So one way you could say suffering is necessary for us is if we didn't have suffering, the danger would be complacency. So suffering is often the grit and the oyster that kind of gets us going in any sort of quest or search. Interesting enough, living and working at the Buddhist Centre here, like loads of people come to learn to meditate and so on, and very often, not 100% so, but very often why people come is they've had some experience of suffering, some kind of acute experience of suffering. So maybe they've had, I don't know, a breakup or a bereavement or so on. That's not the only reason people come, but very often that's the case. So suffering can be a spur. But another way of answering your question is that even if we're not particularly suffering, even if we're in a way kind of happy enough or successful, everything's going well, our relationships are fine, what the Buddha would say, as it were, is from the point of view of enlightenment, that is limited. So that you're suffering in that limited sense. There's much, much more than this. It would be like, it'd be like, well, there's all sorts of allegories. It would be like, one that's often used is these, frogs who live in a well and they've never seen the ocean, and they think that's the world, or Plato's cave where you've got these beings living in a cave and they think that's the world, and there's actually much, much more than that. So when the Buddha teaches about suffering, it can be in those two different ways, yeah? I don't know, has that... Yeah? Yeah, good. Yes, another question.
So, I have a question about the idea of value.
Oh, yeah.
And it being sort of, in the way you described it, it's kind of above.
Yeah.
So my first question is, are you implying it's kind of separate, and so how do you guard against seeking that too much? Because then I suppose it becomes similar to something that would be sought in the wheel metaphor. Ah,
that's a very good question.
Because I always thought about it, and stuff I've read before, places it internally, not externally. And I suppose the danger I see of it being external is that you aim for it and get attached to that idea.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like everything else.
Well, that's a very interesting question. So the question is, just in case everybody didn't hear it, and make sure I've got it right, that, okay, so on one hand, our suffering is, you could say, caused by craving, but what about craving for value? Is that the same? Interestingly enough, it's common to think, as you've just said, but what about craving for value? Doesn't that just lead it to the same place? Actually, the Buddhist teaching says it's a different, well, let me just try and put this better. Basically, that seeking for happiness isn't the thing that causes suffering. Yeah? What causes suffering is seeking for it in a place that cannot give it to you. Yeah? So that's the problem. The problem isn't the seeking, or even you could say the problem isn't the craving. The problem is that you're trying to get, ordinarily, you're trying to get happiness from something that cannot give it to you. But value, if it really is universal value, can give it to you. So actually you can direct your desire towards value without kind of fear of suffering. Yeah? So probably there'll often be a bit of mix of motives, but don't worry about that. It's actually fine to direct all that kind of thirst, all that kind of desire, if you like, towards something sort of higher or deeper, whichever metaphor you use. That's, as long as it can hold, what you need is a big enough thing to be able to hold the weight, to mix my metaphors, of your thirst, yeah? If you try and put all that thirst onto something too small, like another person or a material thing, it can't possibly hold it. So that will lead to your suffering. But if you put all that thirst onto a quest for, say, truth or beauty or goodness, to use the classic three, they can hold that. So you won't be. It's not only that you won't be hurt by putting all your desire on that. That will just keep opening and opening and opening up. Yeah. So it actually is different. It's distinct. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a very good question. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
What had you done to make the child hate you?
What had I done to make the child? Well, I had just been there. Yeah, I'd just been there, I think. I'd just been there. I think he probably was traumatised because his mother was ill. Actually, that's a good question. I think the child felt hatred because he knew his mother was ill. He was not exactly pre-verbal, but almost pre-verbal, so we couldn't explain to him what was happening. So actually that's quite interesting. It ties in with the theme of the talk, doesn't it? Because a little child just was railing against, that monster of impermanence. We're sort of more sophisticated, so we kind of cover up those primal feelings of, we don't want to die and we don't want the people who love us to die. But he was just experiencing that in the raw, and it was being, I was the sort of emblem of that. So he hated me, I think, because I wasn't his mother. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So if you're seeking value in life,
Yeah.
Do you feel at all like you should come at it from a certain perspective, like you should be grateful, you should be trying to be present, because otherwise you might miss that?
Yeah. That's a very good point. If you're not present, if you're not aware, you might miss value. And I think we've all experienced that, haven't we, when we're in a beautiful place, for example, and we sort of intellectually know it's beautiful, but we just can't feel it or something. So that's why, for example, we practice meditation, so that we're sensitive enough, alert enough, and responsive enough to be able to see beauty, truth, goodness when they present themselves to us. So you could say that's one of the deeper reasons for practicing meditation. Of course, we teach meditation here. Many people come to be calm and so on, and that's not a wrong reason, but that's what you've said is a deeper reason, and that is something we can sort of, I'm going to say train. I don't want it to make it sound too utilitarian. That capacity to respond to value is a gift of being human in a way, but often it's not very alert in us because there's other capacities in us. We blunt it. We cut ourselves off from it when we're in negative states of mind. Again, we've often probably all had the experience, if you're somewhere beautiful, like with, I don't know, your partner who you've just had a big row with, and you can't see you're in such a kind of bad mood that you've gone on this brilliant holiday and you can't see the beauty because you've just had a big argument or something. So we're often blunting that capacity to respond to value. But just as we blunt it, we can hone it. Yeah, so that is something. It's a faculty, just like any other of our faculties that we can develop. And the first way to develop that faculty is to really notice where we respond, because it's got to be our responsiveness to value. You can't respond to something because somebody else has told you to. So just start looking at what sort of moves me, what's beautiful for me, where do I see truth? That's the first step, and then just value it and sort of practice. I'm hesitating over my words because I don't want to, again, it all just to sound too workaday, but allow oneself to become more sensitive to that, yeah. But that's something we can hone and make more come into being. Yeah. So 2 more. So 1, 2. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Question from this gentleman.
Yeah.
Please describe your happiness right now, and how did you come to this point?
Okay. Well, describe my happiness. I mean, if I have got happiness to any extent, I think it is by trying to practice those 2 things I've described. But I'm equally aware of where I fail in that as well. So I have been practicing meditation and Buddhism for 30 plus years now, and I think that has helped me to see that happiness will only come from reaching up and reaching out. So any happiness that I've got has come from doing that, and I'm often failing. I'm often caught in selfishness, kind of meanness, just blindness, just can't see beauty when it's sort of staring me in the face and so on. So I feel like definitely come to the Buddhist Center, practicing meditation, practicing Buddhism has helped me to become, I don't know if I'd even use the word happier, certainly bigger, certainly I must be happier, no, I think I am happier, certainly bigger human being, and I'm also aware of my own failings as well. Strangely, I think that's what probably practice of anything creative does. It could be practicing poetry or a musical instrument or learning another language. You get at the same time you get, as it were, better at it, but you also realise how big the thing is. You know what it's like? You know how when you first start learning, like I've been practicing writing poetry as well, and at first you think, oh yeah, this is quite easy, I think I'll be able to do this. And the more classes you go, the better your teachers are, you think, oh blimey, I didn't realise it was this vast. So strangely, both are happening simultaneously. You're both sort of getting better, for want of a better word, and you're seeing the vastness of the thing you're trying to move towards. And I think that's right. For anything creative. You'll have those 2 trends operating at the same time. Yeah. So I've just got time for one last question, then it's, yeah.
It's just your point on what's in it for me.
Yeah.
It's just regarding, aren't we born with a hardwired mechanism of survival?
Yes.
And, as a young person, you're forever in
Yeah.
your nest. And as you get older, you just naturally, mellow. If we go against that, aren't we causing more conflict in our own brain?
Well, I think yes to the first bit and no to the second bit. I think that's exactly right. That what's in it for me is hardwired, or almost hardwired. So that's why it's not a moral issue. That's why we've survived as a species, yeah. But what the Buddhist life is lived to do is to undo that, yeah? But it's to undo it without any harmful side effects. So it's definitely, as I say, that's why it's not moral. It's just how we sort of come as human beings. It's sort of why we are. So I think that metaphor being hardwired is right. But actually, and we think, if I undo this, that'll be the end of me. But what the Buddha teaches, I have to leave you on this note, is that won't be the end of us. It's instinctive to think, oh, that'll be the end of me. But what the Buddha teaches is actually, no, that'll be the beginning of me as a new kind of being, almost a new kind of species. The Buddha, in a way, is a new kind of species. So I have to leave us with that very intriguing note, and because it's now Maitri Vadri is going to speak to us. But thank you very, very much. And if you've got more questions,